Good Tuesday morning. And how's your day going so far? Hope you're having a good one. It's 11:06 right now. Hi and welcome to the third hour of our show this morning. I'm Rick Howe with you until 12:30 this afternoon. And here's what's coming up for you this hour and next. Nova Scotia NDP Leader Gary Burrill joins me this hour to talk politics, and we'll take your questions as well, and I'll make the introduction in just a moment. After the news at noon, Governor General Julie Payette's in Italy this week commemorating the 75th anniversary of the Italian campaign. It was Canada's longest campaign of the Second World War. And military historian John Below will tell us more about it this afternoon. And it is cheap night at the movies tonight. And the Chronicle Herald Stephen Cook is back with us this afternoon with his look at what's playing. But this hour, perhaps you've seen the new TV ad campaign from Nova Scotia's New Democratic Party. An ad featuring leader Gary Burrill talking about the state of the province's economy, a state that he says, in the economy, he says, it is not working for a great many Nova Scotians and their families. Joining me in the studio this morning is the leader of Nova Scotia's New Democratic Party. He would be Gary Burrill. Good morning to you, Mr. Burrill.
Morning to you.
How are you doing this morning, sir?
Very best, thanks.
I'm glad to hear. And if you've got a question for Gary here this morning, 902-405-6000 or 1-877-801-8255. You can also reach us via email, rick.howe@news957.com, or even tweet us a question or a comment. Our Twitter handle at The Rick Howe Show. So talk to me about the ad here, Gary. Very much focused on you and the state of the economy and your thoughts on that and the timing of the ad. Why now as opposed to a little closer to the election? Is it because, I don't know, maybe you don't think that Nova Scotians are familiar enough with Gary Burrill?
Well, in terms of the election cycle, if it were a ball game, we'd probably be in the sixth or early seventh inning at this stage. So we're not 100 miles away from a provincial election. We're in the back half of their this year of their mandate. So we'll be looking for an election in the new year, and possible it could be the year after. But I think lots of probability it could be in the new year.
So this is kind of like a pre-election, get-to-know-me kind of thing,
well,
right?
Yes, and in this period, it's our responsibility as an opposition party offering to form the government for the province to set out what we think is a better path for the province, the ways that we think decisions could be made more constructively than they're being made at the present. So in this second half of the third year of the present government's mandate, that's our responsibility to do that, and that's what we're doing.
How do you rate the government's performance so far? You're right, in the second half of their second mandate here, and the Premier's already suggested that he's interested in a third mandate as well. But how do you rate the government's performance thus far?
Well, if I had one word to describe it, I think the word would be complacent. I find the government complacent in the face of the real difficulties people are having. So I'll fall in the legislature when I and the rest of the members of the NDP have questioned the government about things like low incomes, lack of housing, lack of access to health care, particularly mental health care. The government always responds by saying, look, in their view, the situation is exactly as it ought to be. That in their view, the economy this is the Premier's word, is thriving. Well, you can't have a thriving economy when you have, as we have in Nova Scotia, the lowest median incomes in the country. That's true by definition. So I think for the government to say that things suit them, that they think they've done a good job, that they think they're on the right path, when we have the lowest median income and when we also are the only province where child poverty is getting worse instead of better, I think this is complacent in the face of the real difficulties that people are facing. That's my general sense of them.
But the public opinion surveys still show the Liberals in first place in voter popularity after it was two polls ago where the Conservatives were momentarily in the lead, but then the Liberals have regained that lead. And your party sits in third place right now, Gary. So, again, it seems that people really haven't, as far as the Liberals are concerned, they're still solidly behind the Liberals, it seems.
I don't have that experience. It's been a season with a lot of knocking on doors between with the federal election. I've been all over the province. You hear very little affection for Premier McNeil and the enterprise associated with him. What you do here is people talking primarily, the number one thing is about the crisis we have in the healthcare system. I think that complacency I'm talking about, people are offended. I am offended by the government's position that we don't face a healthcare crisis. We clearly face a healthcare crisis when we have a fifth of our hospital beds occupied by people who aren't hospital patients, but are in fact just waiting for placement to go to a nursing home. There are no nursing home places for them. The government in 6 years hasn't opened up a single new nursing home facility. This has all kinds of negative impacts on our emergency rooms, on our 911 service. When you speak to people, I would say the number one response when you ask people what kind of issue is at the forefront of your minds and in your household's experience that the provincial government should be dealing with. The number one thing is health care. There is, in my view, a general consensus that there is a health care crisis. And in the face of that crisis, I find the government complacent.
But they have shut down 2 hospitals in Cape Breton, for example, or planning to shut down 2 hospitals in Cape Breton. They say they need to make these kind of steps to get, again, the healthcare's financial house in order, that healthcare spending is out of control right now. But you've promised at the same time to keep those hospitals open. So I guess my question is, how can we afford to do that when we're told by the government that we simply can't afford to keep all of these hospitals that we have in this province open and running?
Well, I think it's a major mistake for the government to be closing those hospitals in Waterford, North Sydney. You need to think about the kinds of care that are provided in a community hospital. So often it's people who are waiting to get into a nursing home. It's people who are dealing with flare-ups of chronic conditions like COPD or ulcers related to diabetes, leg ulcers, and things of this sort. Longer-term kind of rehabilitation. These are the bulk of the patients in community hospitals, and these are the kinds of circumstances where you actually have better medical outcomes when people are in their own home community, when the staff is apt to know who they are, when their spouses don't have to hire a cab for $25 to get them over to the regional hospital to see them, where the people are in and out. I've seen this all my working life. I'm a United Church minister, as you know. I've done one pile of visiting in hospitals. So I know that when you're dealing with patients in these sorts of medical circumstances, the outcomes are better medically when people are in their own community. So I think it is a serious mistake for the government to be moving to close those 2 hospitals. I think there will be negative medical outcomes on net by moving those services into the regional hospital in Sydney. I think it's a centralizing model that doesn't provide the kind of services needed.
Well, how do we afford then the healthcare system that we have? And some have suggested maybe a hybrid model based in similar countries in Europe, for example. Your thoughts on that possibility at all?
Yeah, the key reason why we have financial difficulties with our healthcare system in Nova Scotia is that the federal government does not transfer funds to the provinces on the basis of the criteria to do with age and health of the population. So here in Nova Scotia, we have a concentration of population of people who are older. Therefore, of course, it costs more to service that population medically. But the federal government transfers funds to us on a per capita basis. That means that in Mississauga, they're getting the same amount for a 24-year-old triathlete as we're getting in Nova Scotia for a 97-year-old in River John. So we've got a lot more 97-year-olds than they do per capita. They've got a lot more 24-year-olds than we do per capita. It's a terrible system. All the parties have spoken against it over the years. The present Liberal government, I think, was a very serious mistake, and it's having all kinds of impacts across the healthcare system. Agreed to a system of federal-provincial healthcare transfers that is based just on the per capita model and does not take our demographic and geographic circumstances into consideration. It's the root of all evil financially. It is solvable.
But is public-private partnership within the healthcare system, is that part of the solution?
I don't think so. I think that, in fact, the McNeil Liberals figured this out themselves recently in New Waterford and North Sydney. So when they first announced the new health centres that they're going to be building there in the place of the hospitals they're closing, they were adamant the best way to do this, the most efficient way to do this, the only real way to do this is to do it by a P3 project. And then a couple of weeks ago, they made an announcement, no, we've changed our mind. This isn't going to work. We're not going to do it by a P3 process. We're going to do the health centres in New Waterford and North Sydney by a more traditional public procurement system. I think they made the right decision to change their mind here. I think they should change their mind also on the QE2.
Yeah.
The difficulty, sorry, go
So
ahead.
I was going to say, they're still going PPP with the QE2 project.
They are. And the difficulty with the P3 model with hospitals is that healthcare and hospital care are changing so quickly. So these are agreements that are going to be in place for decades. But who today thinks that, let's say, in 20 years, healthcare is going to look like what it looks like today? There are going to be processes, treatments available in 20 years that we can't even imagine today. But on a P3 model, a private company owns our hospital. And if we want to go to them and say we need to make revisions and changes in our hospital so that we can deal with these new treatments, they will make it so expensive for us to be able to do that, we won't be able to do it. Whereas if we owned the hospital, we would be able to say, we've got to make this shift, we've got to make this change. We would be able to be flexible and fluid in the way that healthcare infrastructure really calls for.
But we went the P3 route with the schools a number of years back because simply we couldn't afford new schools on our own, and there was a desperate need for new schools. And are you saying so there's no room within the healthcare system for something similar along those lines?
Well, it didn't work in the schools. So
but we did get new schools out of it, though.
We did, but we paid far more in the end than had we built the schools themselves. Had we built the schools ourselves, we would have been in a position today where we would have more money for building the new schools we need, which in fact we don't have because it's been paid out to private consortiums in the P3 model. Same thing with highways. We paid an awful lot to build the Cobequid Pass on a P3 model. And a great deal of that went for the profit margin of the company that did the building. Had we, in fact, done that as a public procurement, traditional construction, we would today be in a place where we would have more money available to twin more of the highways in the province.
11:18 is our time right now. He is Gary Burrill. He's the leader of Nova Scotia's New Democratic Party, and he's here with me till noontime today. And if you've got a question for Mr. Burrill, give us a call at 902-405-6000. or 1-877-801-8255. You can also send us a question via email, rick.howe@news957.com. We'll be back with more with Gary Burrill, leader of the NDP, right after this quick break. It's coming up now to 11:22 on this Tuesday morning. Nova Scotia's New Democratic Party leader, Gary Burrill, is my guest here. He's here till noontime, and if you've got a question or a comment, give us a call at 902-405-6000 or 1-877-801-8255. Now, Gary, your background is you're a preacher, right?
I am a preacher.
What got you into politics?
Well, you might not believe it, but there's not as much difference as you would think between leading congregations and leading a political party.
But there had to come a point where you say,
people are people.
Yes, that's true. But at what point did you decide? Well, this is something maybe I should be doing.
Well, I have been involved in the NDP many years. During the years while I was serving congregations, there came a point where it seemed natural for me to be the candidate in the area where I lived at the time, which was Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley, and the second time I did that, I won. But I've been quite struck by how it's not been a jarring transition at all. My wife's late stepfather called it when I went into politics. He used to say, Gary's gone to preach the other way. So it's a little bit like that.
All right. Dan, are you enjoying politics, obviously?
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. 902-405-6000 or 1-877-801-8255. We talked a bit about the PPP, the private-public partnership scheme. And again, you're on record as very critical of, again, the province's decision to go this route, at least as far as the QE2 is concerned. But it does seem to be something that governments, because this is a cash-strapped province, and I'm told that it may be easier to go the PPP route than perhaps going and borrowing that money. What's your take on this, Gary?
Well, it's precisely because we're in cash-strapped times that P3 doesn't make sense as a way of building our hospital infrastructure because it always costs more. There are no exceptions ever. There are dozens of studies that you could fill a grocery cart with studies about this from other jurisdictions. There are things to be said in favor of P3s. I acknowledge that, but one of them is not that it's cheaper. It is always more expensive. We are not in a position to be able to afford that. Think of the money we would have today for our roads had we not spent a number of years ago all the P3 model on the Cobequid Pass. Think of the money we would have for our kids had we not developed those schools on the P3 model, both more expensive models, and we certainly need to have resources for our healthcare system. Think of the money we would have down the road if we didn't pay a private company profit premium to own and to develop and look after our hospital, but instead did it ourselves.
We've seen, again, private healthcare creep into our public healthcare system, the private MRI clinic, for example. We know there's some cosmetic surgeries that are able to be done in private clinics. Is there room within our healthcare system for these kind of facilities?
I think the place where the private sector coming to have a bigger and bigger role in healthcare that I find most troubling is in mental health. We know that today, anybody who has experienced a mental health issue, if you have money or you have benefits or insurance, there are lots of private psychological services companies, private sector counseling companies you can go to, and they will almost invariably see you on a very short term notice. It costs usually over $100 an hour. But many people in Nova Scotia experience mental health issues and don't have $100 or more an hour to pay for those services. So they go to the public services. And today our public services, the wait times are in different parts of the province, 3, 6, 8 months or more, longer. So we've got this two-tier system, one for people who have resources, cash, and another for people who don't. I think this is very unfortunate, and it's not the way we want to go in Nova Scotia.
Put on the headphones. We're going to go to the phones here now. He is Gary Burrill. He's the leader of Nova Scotia's New Democratic Party. And if you've got a question, give us a call. Again, 902-405-6000 or 1-877-801-8255. Jenny, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well. You have a question for Gary here this morning.
I do. I'm calling because I'm a school food advocate here in the Annapolis Valley, and I'm also a cafeteria worker these days. And I'm calling in today to just really appreciating the comments about saving money in the future, health costs, and I'm really concerned about the environment in schools in regards to the types of foods that are being served. And my feeling is that this is the result, and my feeling and others' feelings is that this is the result of cafeteria workers' wages not being funded by the province or the federal government at this point. And I'm really hopeful that that we'd be able to start putting some money into school food so that our kids can benefit from healthy school food now, and that we can all benefit from reduced health costs in the future.
All right, good points. And Gary, I'm going to ask you to just think of a reaction to that because we have to take a quick break right now, though. It is 11:27. We'll get into a conversation about the minimum wage and your proposed increase of a $15 minimum wage. He is Gary Burrill. He's the leader of Nova Scotia's New Democratic Party. And if you've got a question for Gary, 902-405-6000 or 1-877-801-8255. We're going to take a quick break right now, though, for a news update. Then we'll hear more from Gary Burrill. We'll be back right after the news. Coming up now to 11:33 here on a Tuesday morning. Gary Burrill is in the studio with us here till noontime. He's the leader of Nova Scotia's New Democratic Party. And if you've got a question or a comment for Gary here this morning, 902-405-6000 or 1-877-801-8255. And the caller just before the news wondering a couple of issues here. One, food security, especially when it comes to school. And secondly, whether or not, cafeteria workers will be paid a reasonable wage, and that leads to the discussion about the $15 minimum wage that you're on record in suggesting that that's absolutely necessary. So weigh in on the two questions here, her food security issue and then the question about living wages.
First of all, about this very important question about food being made available in schools.
Healthy food.
Yeah, healthy food being made available in schools in a provincially backed program. So we know hungry kids don't learn. The job of school is not accomplished for kids who haven't eaten what they need to have been eating. I remember a survey a couple of years ago in Dartmouth where teachers were asked, does the hunger of the students in your classroom have a serious negative effect on your capacity to teach them? And I don't remember the exact number, but it was way up in the 90-some% of the teachers who said, yes, that is the case in the classrooms where I teach, that what the kids need to learn, they're not able to get it because they're hungry. So for this reason, in the NDP, we've been pushing for and advocating for a universal school food program, so that no matter in what part of the province that you live, we as a people here in Nova Scotia guarantee that every kid who is in any one of our schools is adequately nourished during that day. This would improve not only the outcomes in our school system, but we know that when you invest in kids' diets, and in kids' lives in general, this is the thing that has the greatest payoff for a society over decades. So this issue that Jenny has raised is a very important issue for the province. To say, well, we're not able to do that because we haven't got the money, we haven't got the resources, is in fact to foolishly bypass one of the best opportunities that's in front of us.
Because that's their explanation in regards to the $15 minimum wage. We just can't afford it right now.
Well, to come to the question of better wages, in Nova Scotia, we have almost a third of the people who work for wages working for $15 an hour. And we also have big parts of our economy where there is inadequate growth, where there's real stagnation. Well, you don't have to be a genius to understand why this is. When people are making $11.55, $12, $13 an hour, they don't have enough money left over to buy things. When people aren't buying things, you're not going to have an economy that's strong, buoyant, developing, generating investment, other job-creating opportunities. So we advocate a $15 minimum wage so that we can get in a position like BC and Alberta and increasingly in Ontario, where people in Nova Scotia actually have the resources, the means to spend something other than on the absolute bare bones, rock bottom necessities all the time.
But is our economy robust enough that we can afford a $15 minimum wage? And the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, for example, will tell you that there's a snowball effect, that increasing minimum wages will also result in an increase in prices.
Well, there are lots of studies on this question. What is the impact of a $15 minimum wage on inflation? I think the evidence is incontrovertible that the impact on inflation of a dramatic increase in minimum wage is very small. One economist recently said that if we went to $15 an hour, it would be roughly the addition, I think it was a nickel, maybe a dime on the price of a hamburger.
Really?
So I think that argument has been pretty well dealt with. The argument about whether or not it can be afforded, this is a very serious question as people look at their at the books of their businesses. But what I'm trying to say about this is that all businesses must have customers. If you live in a province where the people have the lowest income in the country, how are you going to get to the customer base you need? How are you going to have customers for the services you want to sell, for the goods you want to sell? We know that if a person's working 40 hours a week for the minimum wage, or for $12, or for $12.50, they in fact are not even getting to a place where they can have a decent look at the poverty line. So what are they spending in the economy? Very, very little. And what impact is this having on the small business sector from their spending? Very, very little. So we have to do something to break this ice jam. The way to do it is, as they've done it in other parts of Canada, $15 minimum wage.
Michael just emailed as we chat here. He says, so your argument for the $15 minimum wage is the trickle-down economy? LOL, he writes, which is the laughing out loud.
Yes, well, I know what it means, but I'm not quite sure what he means by that the argument is a trickle-down economy. The point here is very simple. Two things. One, people in every economy have to be able to live. When a person goes to work every day for 40 hours a week all year, and they're not anywhere near to the poverty line, then your economy simply will not work. It won't function. It's not practical. When people have a job, they need to be able to have the expectation that this will give them the ability to pay rent, to be able to buy their groceries, and when they get a prescription, to be able to have the prescription filled. If a job doesn't do that for you in this country, then there's something very wrong with our economic system. That's the key point.
But on the flip side, Matt just tweeted to say, as a business owner, if I am forced to raise my employees' wages, I will have no choice but to increase my prices to maintain my existing profit margins.
Well, as I say, we're not questioning that there will be an impact on prices and inflation, but I'm saying that impact is much smaller than the benefit that comes from expanding the customer base. I don't think there's any small business or even medium-sized business where if you asked people, the owners of businesses, what is the big challenge in front of you? I don't think there are very many that wouldn't say, well, having a broader customer base would be very important for us. In Nova Scotia, we have to remember, where are we? We are in the province with the rock bottom income in the country. That is our economic problem. We have to address this. So I've said about the McNeil Liberals, I think the difficulty is that they are complacent about this. They are not moved by this. They don't see it as a primary problem. It's not only a primary problem from the point of view of people's living, it's a primary problem from the point of view of having a vibrant, vital, operating economy. That's what I'm trying to say.
Let's go back to the phones, and Tony's on the line with us with a question this morning. Hi, Tony.
Good morning again, Rick. Good morning, Mr. Burrows.
Morning.
I'm going to tell you right up front, I despise your philosophy, but I'm going to ask you a question. You've come up with several problems. I'm 74 years old. My marginal income tax this past year, was 38.6% before I paid GST, PST, and property tax at 74 years old. That's amazing. And on top of all of that, I hear every year, well, there's no increase. We haven't increased taxes in the province, but taxes have been increased. But, that doesn't make any difference. There's so many things. You have brought up so many problems, but you haven't brought up a solution. The one thing you haven't said, Mr. Burrows, is where does that money come from? And there's only one word that goes at the end of that sentence, sir, and that's tax. And if you continue to tax me, who makes no money and never gets a tax pay increase because I'm 74 years old, you're putting me in poverty. You're literally going to put me in poverty at some point. I can't afford to pay for my next-door neighbor's child's schooling. I can't afford to pay for it without maintaining and continue to maintain my standard of living. So what I'm asking you is, where's the money coming from? Do you own a money tree orchard? And every other politician, do they own money tree orchards? You all have your own programs. You all have your own perspectives. Tell me where this money comes from.
Appreciate the call.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Tony. And Gary?
Well, Tony, I certainly don't despise your philosophy or your experience. I think you're talking out of an experience that's shared by an awful lot of people and a very common frustration. Look, I was very proud when the NDP was in office to be one of those who was able to vote for making the tax change, under which in Nova Scotia today, no senior who's receiving the supplement pays any provincial income tax at all. That was brought in by the NDP government as part of an NDP philosophy. I think it was a very important tax change. I think the issues you're talking about are important, and that's one of the reasons why in our party we are so much in favor of making sure that the people on the very top of the picture pay their fair share. Today in Canada, we have people making over $300,000, $500,000 who are paying less percentage base for their income tax than you are. There's nothing fair about this. And it also deprives our whole society and government of the resources we need to do the things that we need to do. So everything about the situation you're talking about, the frustrations that you are speaking from, are very, very easy to understand. But these are problems that have solutions. We need to tax those of modest incomes less, and we have to see that that those who are in a very privileged position are provided the opportunity to carry a bigger end of the board.
So what's the cutoff line there? At what salary do they pay more? Where's the line?
In my opinion, anybody who is making more than $250,000 a year ought to welcome the opportunity to contribute more to the well-being of the society that they're privileged to be a part of.
Let's go back to the phones, and Jason's on the line. Good morning, Jason.
Good morning, Rick. Good morning, Gary. Thank you for letting me be part of your show this morning.
Good morning.
I listen to you, Gary, and I find myself always in the same position that there's so much that the NDP believes in that I feel like I could support. The issue I have with the NDP is it's always spending money to solve problems, which is fine and dandy. That's what governments do, and that's frankly what they should do. When it comes to how we pay for that money that's spent, the general answers I get, and I've heard you touch a little bit this way, is that most of that can be taken care of through efficiency in government spending and making those that are richer pay a greater share, which sounds absolutely wonderful and as a campaign slogan. But the reality out there is that when we take more money from people at the top and we look for those greater efficiencies, the math never seems to add up. So it seems to me that the only way that we could pay for some of the things that you suggest is to explore the ways that we can do better economic development in this province. And I would very much like to know what plans or ideas the NDP have to improve economic development in the province as a whole, as opposed to just specifically in the HRM, because obviously the city's a major contributor and a major driving force to our economy. But I don't think it does us any favors if we leave the rest of the province behind and that we don't address ways to improve our economy so that people can stay here and people like me that moved away can come back.
Let's hear what Gary has to say to your question. Good question, Gary Burrill.
Well, I think the point you're making about the inequality regionally around the province is very, very important. We're not succeeding as a province if Halifax is succeeding at the expense of all the other regions of the province. So this is why in our party we've been very concerned about the program of centralization in the present provincial government. So we've seen school boards shut down, those decisions moved to Halifax. Regional health authorities shut down, those decisions moved to Halifax. All the rural economic development department shut down, all that moved into a Halifax Department of Business. So this doesn't work in Nova Scotia. We're a highly diverse province, and decentralization and with the respect for local decision makers is the way that we have to move forward. But on your key point about a road towards economic development, look, we are at the moment right on the cusp of a major economic transition. It's as big as the transition that took place in the 19th century from the economy of wooden ships and sail to the economy of iron and steel and rail. And that is the transition that's taking place from an economy based on fossil fuels to an economy that is going to be based on renewables. So every year we see that international investment is moving more and more out of the fossil fuel economy, more and more into the renewable economy. And this is the opportunity for economic development in Nova Scotia, not of a generation, but of a century. We need to invest heavily in a major retrofitting program of our housing stock in the province so that we can be using much less energy to begin with. And at the same time, we need to be investing seriously in the renewable energy, the cost of which is coming down every single year. So in my opinion, the road forward for economic development in Nova Scotia is for us to establish ourselves as what we've already been on the path towards, becoming one of, if not the most environmentally sound jurisdictions in all of North America. We can do that, and I think it will have great economic implications for us. But I also want to say it's important. You were speaking about how everything always involves money and governments are talking about. But, a lot of this just comes down to making sound choices. So I was speaking earlier about mental health, for example. Now, two of our neighbors who don't have any more money than we have in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick and Newfoundland, implemented a system whereby if you have a mental health issue today, you call the public system and you will be seen, if not today, tomorrow. Now, why can they do that and we not do that? They can do it not because they've got more money, but because they've said this is a priority for the people of this province. When people are overwhelmed with depression, overwhelmed with anxiety, overwhelmed with related mental health issues, we are going to put it at the top of our list that they are going to be seen by a counselor or a therapist, and they are not going to be left out to hanging out dry for 4, 6, or 8 months. That's going to be at the top of the things that are important to us. So we could do this also in Nova Scotia. This is why I'm saying it's a great concern that the present government is, in my view, complacent, not troubled, not stirred or moved by the fact that we have all kinds of people suffering very serious problems that they can't afford to get the help they need. Similarly, we've seen in post-secondary education, our neighbors in Newfoundland made major investments in making tuition more affordable. And so we see in communities all across Nova Scotia, when people finish their grade 12 and they're thinking about going to university, many of them making the decision to go to Newfoundland. Newfoundland doesn't have any more resources than we do, but they said, we have got to open a door to opportunity to this upcoming generation, or there's not going to be a future for us. Quebec did the same thing. They didn't have any more money than we did, but they invested in post-secondary education and making it more accessible. So today, young people leave Nova Scotia to go to Quebec to study in university because it costs about a third what it costs here, or Newfoundland where it costs less than half. Many of those people don't come back. So it's a matter of saying, what are our priorities? We in the NDP are saying that we think the priority needs to be that we open a door of opportunity for the upcoming generation, that we don't just sit back and say, oh, well, we're cash-strapped, we have not, there's nothing we can do about this, the opportunities aren't wide enough, that we invest in opening those opportunities. And the darn thing about it is our neighbors have already figured this out some time ago. We just need to open our eyes, follow the good examples that are around us, and not sit back as our present government is doing and say, oh, well, things aren't all that bad and we're pretty pleased with our current record. There's nothing about a record of having the lowest income in the country and the worst trajectory of child poverty. There's nothing about that any government should do anything about other than hang its head.
Gary Burrill will be back with more right after this quick break. Coming up now to 11:54. Boy, this hour's flying right by. I think we get at least one more caller in, maybe two. We'll see. Lisa, good morning.
Morning. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
Not bad. I just wanted to make just a statement about the minimum wage thing. I have no problem with people making more money, but if you take a look at the truck drivers around here that are paid by the hour, most of them are paid $17.50 or $18 an hour. So if you put minimum wage of $15, something drastic is going to happen around here. People are not going to be driving the trucks, and you're going to be paying, if they do give a big raise to the truck drivers, you're going to be paying a lot more for your stuff in the store. Everybody.
Right. Let's hear what he has to say about that. And would not a $15 minimum wage have a snowball effect on other salaries down the line?
Lisa, I think the real important thing that what you've said brings into view here is that what we need to be moving towards is a living wage. That is, everybody should make enough at their job that they have enough to be able to pay their rent, their power bill, get their prescriptions, and buy their food. And this has actually been studied a lot. We know roughly what that is. It's around $19 or $20 an hour, depending what city or what part of the region that you live in. So what we're saying is we need to get there to a living wage for everyone, but we can't do that all in one great jump. So we have to start somewhere. We have a serious problem, the lowest incomes in the country, and an economy that is dragged down by people not having the capacity to buy things. We have to address this problem. We can't just sit back and hope for it to get better. So we're saying a good first step would be $15 an hour. But it certainly does not solve the problem of inadequate wages. And you're right. The thing that we have to have in view for everybody is a real living wage. And in fact, that's more than 15.
Before we go, I want to ask you about the Dexter government was elected basically because it became a middle-of-the-road party as opposed to a leftist party. You, on the other hand, are taking the NDP back down a more leftist path here. Is that a gamble, Gary? And what made you decide that way, that perhaps that people be more inclined to consider the NDP again if it was more of a leftist party again?
Oh, well, with all respect, we're not going back anywhere. We're going ahead to the next election on the basis of the things that we have identified as the province needing. We need to address the healthcare crisis. We need to address the urgent situation in family incomes, and we need to address the climate emergency. We have a government that is sitting back saying that everything is really fine, that's in a state, I think, of abject complacency. That's not good enough. We think that the solutions are available to us. We set them out all the time. Some of them I've been talking about in this last hour. So I think it's a matter simply of moving forward on the basis of the things we know we need.
And before I let you go, the Liberal MLA, Brendan McGuire, calling your ad where you're basically walking around Spryfield, he calls it offensive, saying you're kind of picking on Spryfield, that it's he calls it a poor judgment decision. He says that it's playing on that stigma that Spryfield has had over the years as a rough town kind of thing. What do you say to that?
Well, I was brought up in Spryfield. That ad tells a story about a walk I had when I was 12 or 13 coming home from school, and how I all of a sudden really had it register on me how unfair the world is, that so many people haven't got enough, but a small number of people have got an awful lot more than they need. And so, in fact, I went to film the video for that ad at the school where I actually went to school and was walking home from. So I think that's a valid and legitimate thing to do.
Well, listen, I appreciate you dropping by here for the hour this morning. I think we learned a lot more about Gary Burrill and some of his position on the issues, and maybe we'll do it again soon.
Well, what's more important than talking to people? That's a great privilege for me to be able to do it, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you for joining us here today. Gary Burrill, leader of Nova Scotia's New Democratic Party. It is 2 minutes now before 12 noon. We're going to break for a news update, and then we're into the noon hour. Stay with us. We'll be back right after the news, and it is coming up next.